You're listening to A Creative Excuse presented by Echo a Mano.
With your host,
Frank Rose, and your host,
Cara Duvall. After a 4-year pause, we're back, and I have the pleasure of joining forces with Frank, who happens to also be my husband.
It's true. Creative Excuse started in 2019 when Echo a Mano opened as a way for me to connect more with artists and share great conversations with you.
In this episode, we interview Albuquerque-based artist Brandon Maldonado, whose show is up at Echo a Mano through December 2nd.
Brandon is known for his lowbrow pop art Santero Muertos blended style. He started off with a lot of Dia de los Muertos imagery and took a break and really delved deep into other stories and Santero imagery and bringing in a lot of other influences. And in this exhibition, he goes back into Dia de los Muertos images to coincide with the holiday.
The music you're hearing is the track Answer by Watson, aka Frank, off the 2012 album Interstices, which I did the cover art for.
You can download that album for free at watson.bandcamp.com, and you can subscribe to A Creative Excuse on all the podcasting platforms.
So, without further ado, here we go.
Yeah. As long as whenever I have to put the headphones on, then it gets scary.
Yeah.
Oh, I think that would help, actually.
NPR.
That would help you?
It would.
Yeah. Really?
Why?
I don't know. It would feel comforting to have something just like slightly pressing on my head.
Yeah.
You want it to be
Get a little back
in your own
massage
bubble.
Exactly.
Well,
That's
hey,
next
we
time.
could get a little upgrade to the podcasting
my
studio, get some
gosh.
massage chairs.
I don't smoke
think we
weed, but
need
aren't
to-
we supposed to like have
Well, there are
light
3
something
dispensaries
up?
around here, well within walking
Get
distance.
relaxed.
So when you got the
Oh yeah.
cover,
So yeah, my family was excited to hear the story, and I'm telling them, well, they went into this shop in Old Town and saw the work, and he liked it, and then he just interrupts and it's like, well, you don't have health insurance. And I just ignored it and kept telling the story, and then he's like, fuck, and it's like, so I was never supposed to be an artist, you know.
So you're talking about the Zach Brown
Yeah.
band
The Zach Brown band
cover,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is a big deal. I mean, that was nominated for a Grammy, cover artwork, got a lot of attention. I mean, that's a cool accomplishment.
It won a Grammy.
It won a Grammy. Yeah.
It was
because
weird.
of your artwork, I'm sure.
I'm sure it was, and I think there's some people that were upset. This isn't country, but the album itself is called Uncaged. So now that I know what he's done since then, I can tell he wanted to be like unpigeonholed.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
It was his breakout album.
The next album, he had like Dave Grohl from Nirvana produce it, and he did a song on the following album with Chris Cornell singing. You know, so it's like, he was really trying not to be country. That's why he gravitated towards my imagery.
It's like,
and
this
wanted that
person,
to represent his.
he's
'cause
gonna
he knew
break
it was
me
gonna
out.
upset some people.
When did the album come out?
I think that was like 2011,
Interesting.
2012.
Because I know, like, I don't listen to country music, but I know it's going through like a lot of changes in terms of like what is considered country. Like, I know that who is it? Lil Nas X is like he's a rapper, but he did a country album, and then like a lot of country people are like bringing in more beats into their. So like, it's really. I mean, it's not necessarily something I like listening to, but I know it's shifting a lot.
Yeah, I don't follow it either, but you see Sheryl Crow getting involved in country. There's Darius Rucker from Hootie and the Blowfish.
Oh, wow.
There was a guy from Stain, the singer from Stain, who does
I don't know
country
that
now.
band. Interesting.
Ween.
Well, Ween was doing it. Ween did a country album in like the early 90s, but Ween is like an outlier. I mean, it was like a joke album. It's funny because Ween
It's such a good album, though.
It is a good album. And do you know Ween?
I know the name. I'm not familiar with
I mean, they're so like simultaneously sincere and also like fuck everything.
Okay.
It's like this really funny mix. Like they make fun of everything and like everything's a joke, but yet they intersperse with some songs that are just like tearjerkers.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing.
They're making fun, but they're 100% committed and sincere at the same time.
Yeah.
Somehow.
I like it. I like it. It's like the Nirvana thing, the quiet loud, you know, just go back and forth and juxtapose yourself between these two. Did you say Beyonce? Did you say that?
No, but I think you might be right. I think she might have,
because she did a
dipped
country.
her toe into some country, didn't she?
Yeah, just recently hearing about that.
Interesting.
So after that happened, besides your father, did it feel like your whole family started to come around?
Well, no, my family has always been supportive of me
okay.
as an artist. It was just my father that's like, this guy's sitting around drawing pictures all day. We better put him in wrestling, you know, make a man out of him, because he didn't know what an artist.
Because wrestling gives you insurance.
Yeah.
So, but you started kind of showing that the artistic drive was there at a young age, right?
Oh, very young. I mean, we knew I was colorblind when I was 4, because I'm sitting there playing and with the colors and green horses, and something might be wrong with this kid. You know, so that's when we figured that out. It was just because I was an artist.
Yeah.
And that's something that I guess I took for granted. You know, when we're graduating high school, and what are you going to do when you grow up? Everyone's trying to figure out what they're going to be. And it's like, well, since I was very young, I was told I was the artist, and just thought that was what I was supposed to be. So it wasn't even a question.
Right.
But because of the pressure from my father, I didn't get to go to art school. I got accepted into an art school in Denver I wanted to go to, but he wouldn't sign the loan agreement, because they're not going to put this loan out for an 18-year-old. My dad had a co-sign. He's like, you're not going to art school. So I was like, well, I have to do something else. So I went to community college in Albuquerque. It was TVI back then. It's like, I guess I'm going to go to school to be a teacher, you know. So I started studying to be a Spanish teacher, hoping maybe I could teach art too at some point, you know. But I'm taking these classes. I'm taking Spanish classes. We're looking at Dia de los Muertos imagery, and my mind wanders, you know. I was very good at Spanish, but at the same time, I'm over here drawing little muertos on my notebook, and that ends up being the imagery that we see in the show that we have in the gallery today. You know, that's 2001.
Yeah.
So, you know, over 20 years ago.
Right.
It's exactly 20 years since I started painting, which is in 2004.
So was that the first time you like made something that wasn't just like a doodle in a sketchbook, where you were like, I'm gonna make a piece of art? I mean, were you thinking that when you were making sketches in a sketchbook?
That's a good question.
When did you think, like,
because everything was random
Yeah.
before that point. You know, it's like, oh, here's the kind of Jap animation girl, here's a Metallica portrait. It's just random. But when I did the Dia de los Muertos image, it's just like, oh, this is like a statement. What if I made another statement? And it created a whole body of work around that. And being colorblind, you know, what my inspiration was Jose Guadalupe Posada's prints, and they're just in black and white. So it's like, oh, I could do art like this. No one taught me how to paint, because I didn't have any academic training growing up. Anyways, formal training. It was just from graffiti and different things like that. So it's like, well, I could just do pen and ink drawings very easily. I know how to do that, and do some Dia de los Muertos imagery. So that's kind of how that came about. Little things that I didn't think much of, you know, these swirlies, things in the sky. I think I had a fascination with Van Gogh, and he would do this kind of curvilinear rhythms that you see floating in Starry Night, and I incorporate that, and that would end up being something that it, you know, becomes my own visual language later through black and white. I worked at Coronado Mall, and maybe they still have the logo, but it used to be a little sun, and inside the sun it had a little swirl, you know. So I was, I'm gonna do a sun with a little swirl like that. So these things that just came out naturally. It's kind of interesting to look back now that it's been over 20 years and go, wow, those are the foundations were there already when I was doing this first little sketch and the first drawing after when I was 20 years old, you know.
Yeah.
So you've brought it up twice now, and I'm curious about being colorblind and looking at your work, and the colors are so gorgeous.
Yeah.
And impactful, rich. And I'm curious how you worked with that. And
good question.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for thinking they're gorgeous, because
Yeah.
sometimes, I wouldn't know, well, what does it look like to other people, but they commenting about enjoying the color. So, like I started doing black and white drawings in 2000. It was the Muertos, and then by 2004 I started studying painting with one-on-one with somebody that I admired, and he's great at color, and he would tell me, how this is the color used to mix the sky, flesh, and I'm taking notes and doing all this stuff, so I kind of learned these formulas. But 20 years into painting now, I've got more and more comfortable with color, where I really understand when you look at my paintings, you're entering my world. If I did photorealistic stuff, you'd go, oh, the flesh is kind of not the right color. The sky looks a little weird. But my paintings are so distorted and stylized that you automatically just have to abandon this sense of being these expectations of colors being the color you expect them to be. And I kind of like that more and more. Picasso would say, if you put an eye in the socket, people take it for granted. You put it in their forehead, people see it anew. So for years and years, my stylizing of figures was based on that, always thinking about that. But it also could be said for color. Grass is green, sky is blue. Well, what if I say grass is this color? What if the sky is another color? And it's all because you want to get a mood across rather than just depicting reality in the way people understand. That's the power of Picasso's blue period. And I have my piece, The Death of Leroy, in the show, where it's my dog that died last year, and it's very blue. And I think that's a lesson from Picasso as well, is that, using blue and painting blue flesh, blue everything, it's a way of expressing a mood, which is a totally different way of than using color just to represent what you're seeing in life. And it could be stronger. So always having dialogue with Picasso and the work.
It's taking the work and bringing it more into the dream world and the fantastical in some ways.
Yeah.
And then when you do that, people can suspend the critical mind.
The critical mind.
The critical mind that says, that's not how it's supposed to be.
It's funny. I read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, and I think for me, part of it is I don't, that critical mind, kind of parts of it shut off, because I'm not analyzing the parts about what the nature of the environment is or the reality. It's this is just the way it is. And I can kind of, what do they call it? Suspend my disbelief, because it's all made up anyway. And they really push that with the sci-fi and fantasy elements of it. So it allows me to kind of tap into what's the story here? What are the feelings that are happening between the characters? What are the ideas they're trying to get across, rather than trying to, follow along any sense of reality. Kind of puts the reality aside and gets me straight into the ideas.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. And it reminds me of Piet Mondrian or Mark Rothko, to where you're just thinking about the relationship of this color next to that color. The gray next to the blue is pleasing. And that's kind of where I'm thinking about color more in my 20 years into painting. It's I just want to do a piece where I'm thinking about these color relationships. And the subject, I want it to be strong too, but it's kind of secondary in some ways to just these vibrations that I'm wanting to get across, of the moods that come from color schemes. There's a lot of psychological things involved with color, red making you hungry. They'd say, McDonald's was all red inside to make people hungry and things like that.
Do you think? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, and I'm just thinking, there's the fact, there's the reality that actually no one sees color the same. We're all seeing, in some ways, color and the image differently. So it's it is more about the emotions and the moods that are coming through. It's
literally in the eye of the beholder.
It is, yeah.
And the more you get into colorblind research, you come across these people who have super color abilities, and they could see, it's always women, and they could see swatches. They could tell the difference between two colors that most of us could look at. Well, I mean, I'm colorblind, so most of the normal viewers can look at these color swatches and not tell a difference, but they can say, no, this one's more this and more that. So that's a whole other thing.
And then there's that shrimp. Do you remember the name of the shrimp?
We were listening to this podcast, a Radio Lab, I think it was, where they were talking about different animals that had different levels of cones in their eyes, that see the colors. And there's this kind of shrimp that has something like humans, have 4 or something. It's a small amount. It's a surprisingly small amount. And then they were listing, this animal has 6 and this has 8. This shrimp has, and I'm just pulling the numbers out, it was like 20 something cone. It's like, and they were trying to think about how does this shrimp see the world and how many different kinds of colors can, and it's just like this little tiny thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tricky.
Very cool.
So you mentioned that jump from thinking about, art making as just something you kind of just sort of mess around with to I'm making a piece of art. Can you think about a time when there was a shift, and maybe it was gradual, between not thinking you're an artist to thinking, I'm an artist?
Yeah, because on one side it was Brandon's always the artist. From first grade, second grade, Brandon's the artist. All the students knew that, the teachers, so it's kind of given. But thinking that you're always the artist, it's maybe some of the anxiety you have as a child star. You're famous, and then you're not. All of a sudden I see myself 18 to 20 years old in community college, going to school to be a teacher and to not be an artist, and running into old classmates from high school. I thought you were in art school, and it's just I guess not either, so I didn't know how to deal with that myself. But I think I just couldn't get it out of me,
So maybe you always identified with being an artist.
I always identified as being an artist, but once I started doing those muertos and I had a series, I put out a book of that work when I was probably 2004, around there, and then another book a few years later. So it just seemed like such a unique vision. Back then in New Mexico, specifically in Albuquerque as well, I would try to market my prints and go to stores in Old Town, and there was no Day of the Dead imagery. There was maybe an import store that carried some, and it's very rare. There maybe be 1 or 2 local artists I could find that are making Day of the Dead imagery. So I kind of tapped into something. So it's kind of wild to see the roller coaster that whole genre. It's a genre of art now. People that do Dia de los Muertos work, from not knowing that to seeing banners when you drive over the Rio Grande in Albuquerque. There's South Valley banners with sugar skull imagery on them.
Yeah.
So we've kind of adopted that as part of our local heritage.
Yeah.
And now Santa Fe also has it in the plaza, right? They're doing a Santa Fe Dia de los Muertos festival.
Yeah.
But a lot of things changed when Coco came out, and the Book of Life, maybe 6-7 years before that. But it's been an interesting evolution, and I've stepped away from that imagery, and I've done New Mexico Santo imagery. But when I started studying the New Mexico Santos, I started seeing in that work these repetitive rhythms and things that I was just instinctually doing in my Day of the Dead drawings when I was 20. And it was just wow, this is a real interesting connection between the two visual vocabularies. So I thought for this show, it'd be great to go back, and maybe, I'm 40, I just turned 44. So maybe it's part of my midlife crisis, trying to go back to what it was like, what inspired me when I was a young man, 20. So we have the punk rock piece in the show that is basically the same composition. I mean, he has a mohawk now and a few different elements, but it's the same sketch that I had done when I was 20 years old in that Spanish class. So it's kind of full circle, getting back in touch with.
That's so cool. So cool.
It's interesting, right? Sometimes I find that ideas or, I guess messages can come through, but at the time that they come through, we're not ready. We're not ready for them to be actualized. And there's all these other puzzle pieces that need to get picked up before we are ready. And then sometimes they do come, it's like we're come around full circle, but it's not completely full circle. It's almost like we've gone up the spiral, and then we're revisiting something that was a seed
Yeah.
that was dropped.
Yeah, rather than thinking of time as a straight line, linear way, it's coming around that spiral. Like, here we are again.
Here
Like,
we are
wow.
again, and now I have, I have the skill set to actually do you justice now.
Yeah. I'm playing with color now, which is something, those early drawings, they were just black and white. So now that I have the color on my tool belt, let's revision these and see if I can say something that's reminiscent of the past, but also new and fresh.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about starting to look at the New Mexico Santos. When did you start kind of finding yourself drawn to that work?
I was living in Taos. I opened my own gallery in Taos. I believe it was around 2012, 2013, 2014. I was living there, and then I moved to New Orleans. I wanted to take the gallery there. So you see a lot of the old Santos in the collections at the Harwood and Millicent Rogers, so that's where I first started looking at it, but I wasn't ready, kind of goes back to that thing. I wasn't ready. I didn't know what I had to offer that world, until more recently, going through books and really starting to see like, wow, this is very reminiscent to the visual language that I was trying to develop, because I only was doing things in black and white. So if I wanted to create a value, but somewhere between light and gray, I have to have a different texture to do it. So I'd have a squiggly texture. I'd use pointillist points or different zigzag lines. Excuse me. And I'm seeing that the santeros, they were very minimal in their colors, if they even had color sometimes, and they would be utilizing these patterns, and some of them were very familiar that I've used before, and some were like, wow, I wish I would have thought that when I was doing the black and white stuff. So now it's like, well, what if I came back to the Dia de los Muertos and added some of these zigzag patterns and these rhythms. And it's kind of psychedelic Mexican in some way, When you think of a lot of the Day of the Dead imagery, a lot of it's coming out of Michoacan and things you see from the Huichol people, and a lot of that, not doing any psychedelics myself. I was kind of naive to the fact that a lot of this imagery that I'm seeing is influenced by psychedelic rituals. They're taking peyote and seeing all these colorful things. So once I started realizing, it's like, wow, there's this element of psychedelic embedded in a lot of the artwork, even Catholic artwork. I think in some of these stained glass windows, definitely in like Muslim temples where you see the circular forms. It's almost like the way people describe things that they see on psychedelic trips.
Now, a lot of course, the Santero imagery is religious based, and do you consider yourself religious, and do you think that imagery can be even divorced from religion in some way? Because I feel like that you're kind of like pushing it in all these other ways as well. You're like, how can I explore this form in ways that maybe aren't religious, but then there is a religious sort of like connection. How do you relate to all of that?
I was raised Catholic in the Catholic Church. We had mariachi in the band that would do the songs, so it was that kind of thing. And it wasn't until I go to other churches that I realized how unique that experience was. I'm a big follower of Joseph Campbell's ideas on spirituality. So I wouldn't say that I'm a Catholic now, but I grew up Catholic and I understand that. And I think a lot of people that collect the Santos too, they're not necessarily Catholic, but they could appreciate the artistic value of the imagery, So I try to be respectful to my ancestors, because when you go back in the timeline, they're living in the villages where these santeros were making the art. So it was part of their daily life, and that's part of my history. So I feel like I have a right to this imagery, but at the same time, I don't try to say that I'm a santero, this very santero inspired artwork that I do. And a lot of the themes, they are using the santero visual language, but not necessarily a specific saint, although I do saints from time to time,
Yeah. Would you say that like some of these saints could almost be like, not necessarily like specific to a religion, but almost like avatars for a feeling or desire or a spiritual yearning. Like, you know, some saint that maybe in the context of Catholicism is like, you know, serves this specific Catholic purpose,
Yeah.
but could operate as well outside of that particular framework as almost like, you know, like I think, you know, you look at just Jesus, for example, you know, you could look at, you know, the ideas of like forgiveness and love aren't specific to Christianity, right? But he can still be like a figure or however you relate to that as something that can inspire those feelings.
Certainly. Yeah, no, that's a good point. And that's something I learned from Joseph Campbell, is that a lot of these saints I see as metaphors, or even just religious imagery. It's metaphors for the mystery. So yeah, there's some compassion is something that is probably not exclusive to Christianity.
Right.
You know, you could find, oh, this is the image for compassion, and you could put yourself in accord with that aspect of, you know, that's each saint. A lot of people, it was the saint for this or that or the other thing, you know. They're wanting to make a spiritual link to something, empathy, or if you have an illness or something, you know. So I could see how they could function in those ways. But to me, these are all metaphors for the mystery. And that's the same case with the Dia de los Muertos stuff. You know, we don't know what's going to happen, you know, but we have this ritual that we do. And a ritual is an enactment of a mythology. So they have this ritual to keep them in touch with someone they've lost, you know. And I don't think Dia de los Muertos intends to have a lot of answers, specific answers. Right. It's just we're honoring these people, and we believe they come back and visit us on the spiritual plane. Right. Other than that, there's not a whole lot of dogma attached to it.
Yeah, except for the dog that goes across with you on the bridge.
The dog,
right?
yeah. When I was in college, I heard a lady give a lecture, and she said something great. And they said something similar, I think, in Coco about this. I was like, wow, that's interesting, you know. 15 years later, I'm hearing this and coming from Disney. But she said there's 3 deaths. You know, the first thing, the death of the body, your body stops breathing. Then dust to dust, the body's completely gone. You've returned to earth. And the final death, the death of the memory. You know, we cannot prevent the first 2 deaths from occurring. But the death of someone's memory is the function of Dia de los Muertos. And we take time to remember. And, you know, it's become such a pop culture thing, Dia de los Muertos, especially since Coco. You see stuff in Target, you know. With this show, I wanted to make a point, and I do have some imagery that is just eye candy, you know, the typical Day of the Dead Mexican imagery you'd see, but I also wanted to make a strong point that specific pieces are memorializing, like my dead dog. There's a piece about warfare, which, you know, World War II, but it's also, we're in the middle of another conflict, and war is something. And it's inspired also visually by Picasso's Guernica piece. So, you know, he was talking about war in his era, and now I'm in my times, and we have a whole other set. And I have one memorial to school shootings that are happening in the United States, unfortunately. So I just thought it would be important to not just give eye candy, but also to like reflect, and in the true spirit of Dia de los Muertos, this is what these images are about, or what the whole ritual, the enactment of the myth is about, taking time to remember things and people that we've lost.
Right.
Yeah, I know people that are listening to this cannot see it, but hopefully you will come and look at the window display, the piece about the school shootings. When I walked up and saw that one, it just pierced my heart and brought up so much emotion. And I think that's, you know, part of why what you're talking about is important, is to bring us back to time and place, and what we've gone through, and what the people that we've loved has gone through. And
certainly there's so much to think about on a daily basis today, you know. So just to take one day to remember those that have made an impact on us, you know, I think it's just a beautiful celebration, a beautiful holiday. And I can see why it's filling a void in American culture. I mean, you see Joseph Campbell would talk about the holidays that have to do with death. They happen during fall. So we have Halloween and different things, because we see the microcosm of our own lives needs to be put in tune with the macrocosm of what's happening with the cosmos. The seasons change, things are dying. We need to put our lives in accord with that. But also we need to affirm death as a part of life. And Dia de los Muertos is a great way of doing that and taking time to remember people that we've lost and not just be a spooky celebration of things are dying.
Yeah. Well, when you were talking about how it might be sort of in how American culture might need that, or how it fills a void, because on the one hand, like, we tend to avoid death at all costs, the way that funeral homes are created, and we really avoid looking at dead bodies. We really kind of like push it aside. Elderly go into nursing homes, et cetera, et cetera. To bring in, I think, a sense of joy is really important on one hand, right? So you look at like the color and the celebration of life and things, and looking at how can we digest death, right? So bringing in as more of a sense of celebration. But then what you're doing on the other hand is like, okay, yes, we want to bring some lightness into it so that we can digest it, the sugar skulls, right? So that we can bring sweetness. But like, okay, we got to keep it balanced too. Okay, we got to pay attention to some of these other terrible things that are happening. How can we keep that balance, of like, and staying open at the same time, right? Like, death is not fun, but yet, like, how can we bring lightheartedness in it, but also keep open an acknowledgement of the fact that it's a reality that we're all heading towards. Like, you can't escape it.
Yeah.
We're all going there. So it's an interesting balance to like hold, how can I be open and to this and also acknowledge the difficulty of it.
It's a tough balancing act, and I think the Mexican culture with the Day of the Dead imagery is really good at pulling that forward, the joy and not fearing it. The way I depict skulls is very different than maybe it could be like a death metal aesthetic and something very dark. They're more inviting. Someone once said, "Oh, your skulls are more alive than the living." So I present death in a playful way, often way. So it's kind of tapping into that idea of we don't need to fear this. When I moved to New Orleans, I took my cousin to scope it out with me and see should I move here or not. And we went to one of the beautiful cemeteries, and I think she was getting a little creeped out. And I was like, what if that was me in there? These beautiful mausoleums are built so people that love them can go and spend time with them. Little benches and things. But I think we're used to seeing cemeteries in the context of scary movies and Halloween and things, and we forget, we lose that human aspect, that these are people's loved ones there, and it shouldn't be a place that we're afraid to go into.
Yeah, totally.
I remember this what was it? It was a superstition that we would do as small children. Whenever you drove past the cemetery, you'd have to pick up your feet. If you were sitting in the car, you picked up your feet, because somehow if your feet were down on the ground, a spirit could come in through your feet into your body. And so this was, what we would do. But
I could see how that would get you. I remember, I could hear in my head the creepy theme music to Unsolved Mysteries. And you'd say, I remember that one episode where you got this ghost figure. Yeah, exactly. The ghost figure that's just running out into the road while people are driving through. Oh my goodness. It's like terrifying. That's what we've been taught. It's what we've been programmed to think. Stay out of there.
How long did you live in New Orleans, and how did it? I'm curious how it influenced.
Oh, that's
you.
a fun story too, because it does connect. My favorite movie as a kid was Interview with a Vampire. I think that came out when
I'm
I
watching
was
the series right now.
Yeah.
It's not as good as the
No,
movie.
it's not. I went through it, and there's parts I really enjoyed, but it's not the same.
Mm-mm.
But, so I've always had this kind of interest in New Orleans. And when I owned the gallery in Taos, people would come in and say, "Oh, this is like New Orleans." And just from what I understood New Orleans, I thought, oh, it's the old Victorian furniture that I have in there and that kind of thing. But when I actually ended up in New Orleans for the first time, I went into these stores, voodoo stores and all these tourist t-shirt shops, and I'm seeing skeleton imagery everywhere. And it was like, oh my goodness, that's what they mean, that this is like New Orleans. The skeleton imagery is what they're saying. It's not my old furniture that they're connecting. And that blew my mind, There's these import stores that we have in Albuquerque. One I've been dealing with for 25 years now, maybe, Masks y Mas, and they have a lot of masks in there that are imported from Mexico. And you go into these voodoo stores, and it's like, oh, they just have the same Mexican masks. They even have some little figurines of Frida Kahlo, but there people go there, and tourists, they're looking at this and they're not familiar with the imagery. They're seeing it in the context of voodoo. And it's like, no, this is Mexican Dia de los Muertos imagery. So it kind of blew my mind. That I had no idea that was going on in New Orleans.
That makes me curious if there is any connection, if there's a time where Haitian culture intermingled with...
That's kind of the Santeria story, the slavery didn't allow people to have imagery. So if they saw a saint image, Saint Jude or something, and they could recognize the iconography as someone else, a Haitian priestess or god to them, then they could keep that in there, and it'd represent something that they knew from Haiti. So there are these connections. You see a lot of Catholic imagery and Catholic votive candles that are connected to voodoo. So there's this crossover. It's very interesting.
Similar in Mexico as well, with just the way that Catholicism has emerged there, and the way that it's blended in certain rites and rituals with the Mesoamerican religion as well. It's a different form of Christianity in Mexico than you experience here.
Definitely.
It's really kind of amazing.
You hear about sacrificing of chickens in Chiapas. There's a church out there that a lot of people get attention. But you get the same thing, interestingly, in New Mexico. When Lamy came and took over the Catholic Church from Padre Martinez, 200 years ago almost, that's when the Santero art form ends. And he was complaining that, they're not doing real Catholicism here. It's kind of like this weird Indian folk Catholicism. We need to get rid of it, so he put an end to all that stuff too, but that's what's really cool. You see this blending of cultures in the Santero imagery. People want to say, it's Spanish market, that's the conquistadors, that's 100 years before when the Vargas came up, so you have 100 years of people living in a different reality that has nothing to do with conquistadores. These people were Mexican people. They'd never been to Europe, so calling it Spanish market, I think, is kind of something that, and they just changed the name of the museum to the Nuevo Mexico, New Mexico Heritage Museum, rather than the colonial Spanish, and I think that's more honest to the story, is that it was always this mixing going on here,
right?
Not just through the DNA. I mean, my DNA is 25% native, but you would probably never guess that. But that's part of the story of New Mexican heritage, and it's in the Catholic rituals that we have in some of these rural churches even today, and in the Santero making, the visual language. They're probably trading pigments, getting pigments from the Pueblo people. So it's very interesting to see the overlap of our relationship to Mexico, also our relationship to the native people here in New Mexico. There's parallels, like you said, to this kind of blending you see deep in Mexico between Catholic and indigenous culture. It also happened here.
Yeah. Well, it's just so complex. There were so many different, cultures that were fighting over the same territory, and people living here, in those containers. It's complex. There's a lot of different overlapping histories, like you said. I mean, it's very similar, like you said, in many parts of Mexico, and Oaxaca in particular, I think, is an interesting example, because it is in such a mountainous region. It wasn't colonized in the same way. And so I think it's something like 10 different distinct indigenous languages just in the state of Oaxaca. And, and a lot of those cultures are still, doing their thing, in a way that it's reflected in the arts there as well, just the different variety and richness of craft and art that happens there. And there's a lot of similarities of Oaxaca to Santa Fe.
Yeah.
Being in a valley surrounded by mountains, and I don't know, it's an interesting sort of parallel to look at.
Yeah, the cross-cultural pollination is beautiful, like the Tijuana culture where they have the big hoods that go around their heads that were probably originally inspired by the neck collars that came with the European, but they find their own way to wear it and to represent it. It's very cool to see, and the coins that they'd wear, make necklaces out of these coins. It's a beautiful culture, and there's so much bad that happened with war and things, but in the end, what it did create, I think there's just such beauty to it. I love visiting these old towns in Oaxaca and Guanajuato.
It's cool.
Yeah, and they're still living. They're still growing and changing, and people are coming through and staying or leaving, and there's just constant migration occurring. It'd be interesting if the land could talk and tell the stories.
What do you think it would say?
I can't answer that.
Can't speak for the land.
No, I can't speak for the land. I could dance, maybe.
Yeah. Could dance.
A lot of it does come through, through dance, through song, through food. Often it's really challenging to put the complexity into a story, one story, but it does come through in some way, in a more honest way, maybe through the songs and through the food and through the dance, through the artwork.
That's a great point.
Yeah, because it does seem like a lot of times when we try to define it, it really flattens the reality. When we try to kind of like put this is what happened and like this is what it is. It really, like like you did Spanish Market or Spanish Colonial Art Society. It's like it takes one element of an equation and it just sort of flattens the rest. When in reality, it's like a stew with many different ingredients.
Or a gumbo.
Yeah, but go back to New Orleans. Making me hungry now.
Is it time for some
you go
softballs?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, speaking of gumbo, I did read in your artist statement you mentioned gumbo, and I'm curious if you like to cook. Yes, you did.
Oh, I like to eat. I don't know anything about cooking, unfortunately. I just eat it. Could make some recommendations.
Yeah. What are you enjoying eating
lately? the national dish of Mexico is the chile en nogada, and it has pomegranate seeds in there. There's a place just right around the corner here that makes a good one. But to go to Mexico and order a chile en nogada during the season, because it's around the Independence Day, like September 16th, you go there and they're using the colors of the Mexican flag. So you got the green, the white, the red, and it's a chili stuff. You've had
dish.
it?
Yes.
Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about. But
what are you talking? Are you talking about what is the restaurant?
Fiesta Oaxaca.
No, but the other one that we go with my folks.
Casa Chimayo.
Okay, have you been there?
I haven't tried that. That's in town here?
So good.
You don't have
it's
to
on
go to
Water
Chimayo?
Street.
Very close.
Okay. Okay. I'll have to give that a try.
Is there anything that you're listening to or reading that's providing inspiration right now?
Oh, I do a lot of Beatles, a lot of Nirvana. I listen to everything. I know most every top 40s, 60s radio is 60s, 70s, 80s. I love it all. But when it comes to artistic inspiration, I think the path was laid there before with Picasso and Salvador Dali and the Beatles, people that every few years they reinvent themselves. I think that's really cool. I don't want to just be doing the exact same thing for 30, 40 years. I have to be challenging myself, getting myself lost and not knowing if I can get myself out of this problem. But I think when you already have everything as a mathematical equation, you know what you're going to do. There's no fun in that. So I need to make, as long as I'm having fun. And I think just Beatles going from She Loves You to Let Me Take You Down Because I'm Going to Strawberry Fields. It's just, wow, how did they do that?
Yeah.
And then the Nirvana thing, you know, that happened when I was, you know, we were just talking about that earlier, maybe 11 years old, you know. But you saw how the impact they made, and they were able to change the way we looked at music, because we all thought, you know, oh, these guys are getting girls, they're cool, they're in the back of the limo, the Motley Crue, the Poison, and then something else came along, and it's like, whoa, this is real in a totally different way, and it changed music forever. You know, so it just would be a blessing to be able to tap into that artistic spirit, that he was able to see through the misogyny that was going on in the music scene, and kind of create this unique poetic expression. And if people that are a lot older than me don't get it, that's okay. There's always an in crowd and an out crowd, you know. So just trying to get inspired by that kind of thing to tap into the zeitgeist of my generation, you know.
I think so much of that is really about listening to yourself, you know. It's like, I think that in order to flow and get out of the formulaic, you really have to be in touch with just the movements of energy and your own thoughts and your own feelings, and like what's moving you, you know. I know that that's the case for me anyway. Like the more I listen to that, and the more I act based on what moves me, I feel like the more authentic what it is that I'm making, you know, what it is that I'm putting out into the world. And the more I try to kind of reverse engineer what I think other people will like, the further away I get from it, you know. It doesn't work for me.
Yeah, it's kind of has to be what's within me already, you know. I grew up, like we said, with no artistic training, really. You know, I grew up in the hood in Albuquerque, and I was into graffiti and skateboarding, and that was my reality. And you get some old guy coming to me, do you know about Georgia O'Keeffe? Do you know about? I didn't know about any of that. I know this cool graffiti piece that's in the ditch down the street I could show you. You know, that was real and cool to me. So for better or worse, that still informs my art, and that's something that, you know, since I was really young, and since I was a good artist as, you know, a middle schooler, they thought it was real cool. I hang out with people that are in high school, you know, like, oh, he's really good, you know. I won't say my name, my nickname like that, but they thought it was cool to have this young little guy in the crew, you know. So I thought they were great, awesome people too. But at the same time, by the time I was in 8th grade, these people had to get lawyers and spend time in jail, and, you know, $10,000 in fines for wherever the crew name. So I kind of learned vicariously that, oh, maybe I should try to see an art world that exists not just in graffiti, because I don't want to go to jail, you know. So,
Right.
So aesthetically, it still informs my work. And I think that's part of something that our generation grew up with, this kind of graffiti aesthetic. And now that I'm becoming the old guy, 44, you know, I was always the young guy. And at 44, I'm seeing people younger than me saying, oh, I grew up liking your artwork. And it's like, what are you talking about? And I guess 10 years ago, they were in elementary school, you know. So it's like, wow,
so
I guess I'm that old guy influencing the next generation in some cases. But not saying that I influenced them, but the things that I was drawn to, I see that's what their aesthetic is too. Very youthful, very animation inspired. So it's like, okay, so this next generation coming up is my peeps, you know. And maybe the older, just the typical Southwest art thing that I didn't really see a connection with. Maybe it'll evolve too, because now mainstream art, you don't have a bigger artist than Banksy, you know. That's like a graffiti guy. And was that the case, you know, 30 years ago? Probably no one would have thought a graffiti guy would be significant in the art world. You think of Obey, Shepard Fairey's artwork. It's a lot of people who grew up into the same things that I was, with the skateboarding and graffiti culture. So that's cool.
Yeah, totally. Did you have anything to add to that?
Oh, I just thinking about when I was in high school, my dance teacher befriended these hip hop dancers. And they were also graffiti artists, and she had them come, and they put up these giant wood panels out in our high school, and they did graffiti on the panels, and then she had an art show for them. And I remember all of the parents and the kids walking around and just kind of dumbfounded. What is going on here?
Yeah, what is this?
What is this? What is happening? And I think the dancers did some breakdancing as well to go along with the graffiti. But
it's so weird that these counterculture things have become mainstream, like graffiti with Banksy, to just recently having breakdancers in the Olympics. You know, who would have thought? Who would have thought Ice Cube would be rapping at the World Series? You know, it's like, wow, the times are changing.
I know. I was thinking about, just, flowing and not wanting to stay in a formula, but then like with this show revisiting the Muertos imagery, do you feel any kind of like seeds of how revisiting this work might lead to the next? Are you already kind of dreaming of like what the next body of work might be?
Yeah, definitely. I always have stacks of sketches, so I'm very excited about what's down the pipe, because it's all trial and error. Sometimes like I don't know. I get why people that have a lot of bad paintings in their portfolio, like Picasso, who I love and think has the best paintings, it's because he's taking risks and experimenting. You see people like Monet who will paint the exact same scene maybe 5 or 6 times before they feel like they get it right, So every piece is a learning experience. So it's nice to get them on a gallery wall and step back and go, wow, because sometimes I have a certain thing in mind and it never turns out that way. But when you're able to get past that and you accept it for what it is, like, oh, that's pretty cool for what it is. But there's always new ground to explore. There's so many things in art where you could be talking about the subject matter. You could use color, texture, just all these different places to explore. It takes longer than a lifetime, I think, if you want to. But there is that kind of challenge of like, am I going to do what is true to my soul, or am I going to do what people want and what sells, So
of course.
Kinda like, okay, take the risks.
It's a hard one. Yeah.
So I commend, all the artists who are willing to take risks and put out an album that maybe people don't like.
Totally.
Just because that's what they feel.
Absolutely.
They're inspired, That's the true artistic spirit to me, rather than just finding a formula and stick to that. It's a lot easier way to walk.
Are there any signposts or are there any signposts that let you know you're on that trail, rather than the succumbing to what you think people want?
Yeah, it's hard. You have to see both sides of the coin at once. Put yourself in the middle. Am I doing it just to please me? Am I that self-absorbed? To please others? Like, how do I walk both lines? So I think at the end of the day, if you're having fun, talk about me being 44 now, the 24-year-old me would think, art is fun. You make art forever. But sitting in a room all day with an easel, it's very isolated. It's like your own prison sentence. And if you're not having fun, it really can feel like your own prison sentence. So they don't teach you that when you're in college and you have something to prove. Like, let me tell you what it's going to be like when you're 44 years old and you're still doing this and you're still trying to make it to the next level, whatever that level is. It's a lot harder. So at this point, it's just, as long as I'm having fun, and if I'm speaking from my heart, not just my intellect, people might react with their heart, So you put that in the ingredients and you hope that.
I have such a strange one. I'm curious. So when I know I'm onto something, my elbow, I start to feel like a tingle, almost like a wind passing through my elbow.
Wow.
And then it kind of goes through the whole body, and I know that I'm on some amazing path. The elbow wind happens.
I know people that can tell you it's going to rain or something if their knee aches, but I've never heard of the elbow wind.
The elbow wind.
Listen to the elbow.
You've never even told me that.
The elbow wind.
Wow.
Yeah. Sometimes inside, sometimes out.
Wow.
Cool.
I have a question.
Learn
I'm
something
backtracking way
Great.
back
Yeah,
Okay.
let's go back.
to where you were talking about getting lost. I think lost in maybe the work or lost in life. But I'm curious if there was a time where you got wonderfully lost and had some kind of discovery from that. It could be in the art, could be physically you got lost. Anything. Yeah.
Wow. This is quite the therapy session. I get lost to every painting. I feel like, I I have a clear idea of what I want each piece to be, and it never happens. And I think of Joseph Campbell saying, we have to be willing to let go of the life we had planned in order to have the life that's waiting for us. And you could say the same thing. You have to get rid of the painting we had planned to have the one that's waiting for us. So a lot of it could be me pushing and forcing my will. This is going to be like this. But you also have to step back and say, okay, what does the paint on the canvas, on the surface, what is it telling me? What does it want to be? And sometimes it's not what you intended, People know they can't force a successful relationship. You can't force a successful painting, but you have to be willing to step back and go, okay, what does this want to be? And let go of that plan. And so it's always about getting lost. I don't know if that answered exactly.
You're always lost.
Yeah, I'm always lost. But
Epically,
there's
in a
kind of
wonderful
like
way.
the elbow thing you're saying. There's times in life where I felt like, oh man, I'm trying to move to New Orleans and it's going to be an expensive move. And then someone calls me and gives me like $20,000 in sales. And it's like, where did that come from? Out of nowhere. Or, I wanted to do this Hollywood Forever Dia de los Muertos show a couple years ago. I looked it up and the booths cost like $2,000-$3,000. I can't afford that. And then they call me up to do the poster and I was able to do it. So there's these weird things where it's like, wow, I'm walking this path, and maybe it's because I'm walking the path that doors are opening up for me that would have been a wall, where you think there's a wall, it opens up. So it's like you just step back and go, wow, I don't know. There's back to the divine mystery. I don't know what it is, but that's really cool that maybe the cosmos is helping me because they see that I'm putting in the effort. That's the best I can interpret that.
It's a dance, right? Like there's that phrase, luck favors the prepared. It's like the people who put in the work have good luck, but it's because they put in the work that, they're ready for when the doors open.
Yeah.
I think about, I was talking about this. I work with somebody. It's kind of like I'm not really sure what the relationship is yet, but it's kind of like the person that I download like all of my ideas and like what's going on in the gallery to. It's sort of like therapy, but it's more just kind of like I would overwhelm Kara if I were to talk like this with her or anybody else. It's just like me just kind of like blabbering all my exciting projects and this is what I'm thinking about. Oh, I'm scared about this. Well, anyway, we were talking about that and I was thinking about, when I wanted to start a gallery initially, and I was working for another gallery, and I was, I'm gonna go really slow and take my time and like try to figure out like what the best, very deliberate, and very conscientious, and then wouldn't you know it, I got fired, and so it was like, okay, the universe was like, okay, you're ready, kicked you off the cliff, go. One of those things where it's like, I would have never acted that quickly otherwise.
Yes. That reminds me of, I went to school not to be an artist. I went to school to be a teacher. So I'm working at a middle school. I was doing a long-term sub, which basically means I was teaching a class for an extended amount of time. But I got close to some of these teachers, and I was like 20, 21 years old at the time. And I remember one teacher saying, whenever you have a safety net, you're going to use it, and it just stuck with me this whole time that, when you don't have a choice, you make it happen,
Yeah.
So I kind of lost my job. I didn't get fired, but they got rid of my position at the school. And I decided, at this point I should just be full-time artist anyway. And I needed that little push to make it happen, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Fear,
Yeah. Did you want to add anything before we wrap up?
And this has been delightful.
Oh,
Thank you
totally.
so much.
It's been
Yeah.
fun to me too. So great.
So
Let's have those chili en nogadas.
did you get the chili
let's
en
go get
nogada? So Brandon's show, I'm not really sure when this is going to, I think we're going to release it maybe the week after the opening because we got a good amount of press this week. So Brandon's show is open. It opened on the 1st and it runs through December 1st, I believe. December 2nd. You also have work up at a museum in Colorado right now?
Yeah, there's work at, it's called History Colorado, which is kind of a new branding for the Colorado History Museum down there. So I have 6 pieces down there that are the Santero themed artwork talking about the story of the land of Southern Colorado, New Mexico heritage. So I got those over there too.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Brandon. This has been great.
My pleasure.
All right.
Super fun. What an honor to be able to show it here.